Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. And thank you for joining this webinar. Hi, my name is Ali Rahman. I'm the VP of Growth at Stocksy and your MC for today's webinar. This webinar and the insights shared today actually originate from our constant involvement in editing, curating, working on briefs with clients, as well as our close involvement with our contributors. All of this helps us keep track of trends shaping the visual media space. Okay, let's get this show on the road by introducing our speakers. We have Kristen Neyman from The Real Real. Kristen is a master storyteller, and she's currently leading creative direction at The Real Real. Formerly, she's been instrumental in driving the brand experience at Kate Spade in New York and Isaac Mizrahi. Tara Pixley is an award-winning storyteller with a doctorate in communications, specializing in equity-driven narratives. Her work has featured in the New York Times, NPR, and The Atlantic. She is a Stocksy board member, and it's fair to say we are very fortunate to have her on the Stocksy board. Shane Ginsberg is a brand strategy expert and currently the chief brand officer at Mac 49, where he helps leading brands to find new opportunities at the intersection of culture, community, and technology. From Stocksy, you'll get to hear from our CEO, Trace Cohen, and from Jen Ross, our creative director. With a background in fine arts and curation, she has a deep understanding of art and culture. Her experience in photography and editorial work places her in a perfect position to formulate and deliver the visual insights today. Astonishingly, each is an artist in their own right, creating their own art, books, fashion lines, and topical photojournalism. So we're indeed amongst amazingly creative and brilliant talent today. Okay, I'd like to also take this opportunity to reintroduce Stocksy to you all. We are an artist-led creative media cooperative with 2,000 artists dotted across 90 countries. We are on a mission to prioritize fair pay, originality, and creativity. We are diligent in consciously curating our content. We'd love to hear more about your creative needs and how we can partner with you. So you can scan the QR code or use the link in the chat to get in touch with us. Our range of services go over and beyond the media you see on our website. We look forward to hearing from you. Also, during this webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A section. We'll try to respond to them at the end of the webinar. And hopefully, if you stay till the end, we'll provide you the link to download our Visual Insights report for 2025. On that note, I'll pass it over to Jen to get us started on the Visual Insights for 2025. Jen, over to you.
Thanks, Ali, and hi, thanks for being here. I'm going to try to give you a high-level run-through of the report so that hopefully you'll download it, but really to give time back to the conversation with our incredible guests today, who we're really fortunate to have. I'll admit I'm a little intimidated to be in such impressive company, but really excited for the discussion ahead. So I should start with the Great Unconformity. What is that? As you can see on the slide, it's a gap of billions of years in the Earth's geologic record. So when I was thinking about this as a thought starter, I really thought that it was more common knowledge than it is. And the more I've had to explain it, the more I thought, oops, it's quite a heavy metaphor. But any reference to deep time is going to be heavy. And honestly, we live in heavy times. So this kind of came out of a sense that, we all know and feel that something is coming and that time isn't progressing at a uniform linear rate, but accelerating. And there are these tectonic plates reorganizing the surface of the world and the surface of our reality in really profound ways. And, that's AI, that's climate change, and it's political volatility. So we're actually not going to talk about any of those things directly today, and not because we don't care, but the opposite. As visual communicators, we really need to pay attention and tune into the frequencies of human expression that ladder up to these metasystems. And that's to ensure that whatever subject or topic we're speaking to remains grounded in awareness and empathy. We know that pictures are made and they're put to work in complicated ways, and the relative context in which they succeed or they fail to perform their job is often a stylistic one. So we've approached this report by putting topics and subjects in the backseat and letting style, mood, method, and the creative treatment drive the conversation. And we are going to talk about unconformity. It's not a bait and switch. So we'll start with our first insight that we've called bad form. So this focuses on methods of creation. As everyone knows, art can be really preoccupied with orthodoxies and canons and proper technique, not to mention gear, especially for high-end commercial or industry standard expectations. And bad form is describing this energized spirit that we're seeing of breaking rules and disregarding what we understand to be good technique, and also embracing accessible tools like point and shoot cameras and mobile devices. The outcome is generally a raw, candid look, unrefined, unusual angles, unhinged compositions. And to explore this, we've broken it down into 3 categories, but they're really all overlapping. So the first we're calling weird angles, obvious wrong choices like wide angles on close subjects, playing around with focal length, tilted horizons, motion blur, Dutch angles, something everybody hated a few years ago, probably still do, fisheye lens, which is very 90s, but back. And then lo-fi highbrow is our next breakdown of this look, which is more to do with the early digital and analog technology. Overexposed film, underexposed film, digital artifacts, sun glare, grain, those kind of things, which are all effects that got so out of control when people first started using filters and presets en masse, and then en masse really rejected them. And now we're seeing tepidly being open to them again. And then compositional challenges. So subjects slightly out of frame, distracting foreground elements, distortion, unusual viewpoints, which can introduce tension into the composition. Obviously, there's a really fine line between looking artful and looking bad. So it's not about cutting corners, but a conscious release of control and a deliberate embrace of the awkward and unexpected for something more dynamic and strange. So we really started seeing this a couple of years ago, but in a different way. And I would describe that more as user-generated content aesthetics, lo-fi, digital, mobile, first-person point of view. And maybe 3 years ago, we put a brief out to the community about it. And for a bit of background, at Stocksy, we have editors that hand review every single asset that comes into the collection for quality control. So that's always been set at a really high bar. And so rightfully, when we started to ingest these assets, it was like, the fuck? And so it really forced us to dig into the narrative, expressive, and the creative content of an image equal to the weighting of quality considerations. And what we're seeing now is really quite different, but it's related. We're starting to get these really fun briefs from clients for super strange, playful, creative visuals they're unprecious and expressive in their storytelling. So we'd love to unpack this a bit more.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Jen. I'm actually going to throw a couple of questions to the speakers. Shane, if I can put you on the spot first, I have a question for you. As both a colleague and a friend, but mostly a visionary in the brand space, someone who's founded Razorfish and Evolution Bureau, and now head of chief brand officer at Mach 49, which is doing some radically innovative work. You've always drummed into me the idea that insights drive outcomes, right? That's why we're looking for insights, because we're looking to identify what that outcome is. And I think a lot of creatives and brands are conflicted about the adoption of lo-fi production value being perceived potentially as cheap or amateur. And so what are the risks there? Like, are premium brands participating in this aesthetic, and what is the outcome?
Sure. So normally in a commercial sense, the communication goal is always two things. It's how do we drive and capture some attention, and then how do we create some form of attachment, right? So it's like, how does this stand out? What does it stand for, and who does it stand with? And so there's an obvious kind of move into this space because it signifies vitality. It feels intimate and urgent and unapologetic and all those things that ultimately lead up to what a lot of brands use in almost every brief. And it's my least favorite word in the world, which is authenticity. So, the truth of the matter is, when we speak to authenticity, we're looking at what is true to the audience, what is true to the creator, but also what is true to the brand. So the danger here is that a lot of brands are basically borrowing equity from a lo-fi aesthetic, like basically renting slumming, essentially. And that's dangerous. And it's hard for creators, because there's two kinds of lo-fi. There's those where it's basically by design, meaning it's somewhat contrived, or it's by necessity. I've sat on a bunch of shoots where we've spent tens of thousands of dollars to basically recreate something that looks like it was done for $50. And I think there's a trap and a danger in that. So the thought I always had was, if you wanted to really not just look like it's lo-fi and urgent and immediate, then actually make it lo-fi and urgent and immediate. Limit your production budget, not just your choice of equipment, but actually the people in it and the casting of it. Maybe you don't cast it. Maybe you just invite a bunch of friends over and have it done. Like, you can, if everything just looks like a screen grab from a B-reel, how captivating might that be? So it's a delicate line to play, or a delicate line to balance. But the opportunity here is to use this as an opportunity to actually recapture the spark and the spirit of the original intent, which is for something to just feel true and maybe relatable and interesting. So I think that's where it stands.
Thanks, Shane. Great challenge out to the group. Tara, if I can kind of stay in on this insight, because I feel that it's so resonant and relevant to your work in the world, and certainly as a Stocksy board member, I'm so grateful to the ways that you advise us in your multiple roles as an artist, an educator, an activist, as exec director of Authority Collective. The question I have for you in this, kind of in the same way as kind of Shane has framed up this challenge, is that how do these more accessible tools, lower technical standards, and democratized creativity, so to speak, how does this challenge the canons reinforced by the more staid institutions like museums, art schools, or mainstream media? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Trace. And Shane, I love the insights that you offered, and really appreciate the recognition that people are spending so much money, brands are spending so much money to try and achieve this idea of authenticity that is inherently kind of inauthentic, right? And thinking about the democratization of these technologies and of visual media kind of writ large, the art world is and has always been elitist. And social media and the digital sphere, more broadly, social media being a more recent addition, but just since the advent of the internet, we've really seen the ability to produce content, and then importantly, the publication platforms just put in the hands of the majority. And I think it's important to note that while we do have a majority of people having access to smartphones and the internet, we still have 2.6 billion people, which is 1/3 of the world's population, who don't have access to the internet. So it's not entirely accessible for all, but there is far more access and this kind of democratic access specifically to creating content and publishing. So not only can the majority of folks kind of make what they want, they're no longer tied to the sort of validating structures of museums and galleries and art schools. And so many photographers these days, filmmakers, so many, visual media producers are self-taught. They're becoming industry famous for their Instagram or their TikTok. Young millennials and Gen Z, I think this is the generation and space that are really kind of bringing these visual insights these trends that we're seeing to the forefront, because they're recognizing that we don't need this kind of validation from these other spaces. And much of that is kind of from necessity, right? We don't have the access to the $50,000 photo shoots and commercial filming. They're doing this because this is what they have access to. And that is what feels authentic about it. That is what makes it unique and special and interesting. And I think what we need to do is to recognize that, to value that and validate it. And I think we can have both of these things, right? For some spaces, for some particular shoots or brands, we might want that very kind of polished look, but we need to actually let artists and creatives kind of harness this really, I hesitate to say authentic. I know you don't like it, Shane, but this truly authentic relationship to producing visual media where people are just kind of having a good time and photographing that and letting us kind of experience that with them. And it's really incredible.
Thank you, Tara. Great insights. Jen, let's keep rolling and talk about what you got for us next.
Sure. Yeah. Moving on to an exploration of mood. So we've called this down key shift. And this insight is really about a tonal shift in diverging from the crisp high key visuals that have been really prevalent in the last few years. We really feel that it's like a craving for something that speaks more to the soul than our lizard eye. And this gentler tonality is sort of anathema to the immediacy and the imperative energy of our media spaces. So again, 3 visual qualities, starting with warmth. We all know about golden light, golden glow, golden hour. So yes, it's all of that, but it's also about warm moments and warm expressions and warm environments. And I do want to emphasize that it's not to be confused with like sepia tone or a nostalgic look, which flattens brightness and reduces vivid color. This is more just like infusing images with liquid sunlight. And then glow, this is kind of harder to pin down, but it's an elusive quality of luminosity and subtle radiance. And I like to think about this as feeling lit from within. And I also like to think of it as transmitting a feeling that things have their own sources of energy and light. And then softness, think diffuse light and subtle textures, also soft moments and soft edges, muted tones, almost a cinematic quality in its intimacy, but also the feeling that it's mediated, similar to how memory is mediated. So moving on to our 4th insight, which takes us more into style. And this is called old soul energy. And it's an exploration of more of the aesthetic attitude. At its core, it's channeling this lost premium on connoisseurship, understatement, the appreciation of craft. The ethos is you don't have to have money to have taste. It also has this dimension of reimagining old-fashioned symbols and spaces, but with a modern and inclusive twist. So our first little subcategory is old money vibes. And we weren't really sure what to call this one, and it's a little problematic. but this is not about inherited wealth. It's the opposite. So you might have noticed things like martini bars pop up, or all of a sudden people are really into tennis and golf again. There's also like this trend of, I would say, well, I would call it like clubhouse aesthetics, like wood paneled walls and rugby jerseys, and probably the label in, I'm not going to say this right, but Ameliondor perfectly embodies this, like this knowing appropriation of the signs and signifiers of entitlement. but a transfer of ownership to a younger, more diverse audience that's totally at ease with playing around with these motifs and making them modern and, again, inclusive. So this naturally leads to collecting and curating, which reflects like an interest in provenance, materiality, and also design principles. The MO is unfussy but curated to focus on objects that add intentionality. I'd say like the overall attitude is thoughtful but eclectic. And then, as an extension to that, there's this love of craft, which is tailor-made pieces, one-of-a-kind pieces, handcrafted goods, heritage materials, and an orientation towards timeless pieces and styles instead of trend-driven consumption. And I think this whole insight raises questions that a lot of brands are navigating between sustainable practice and accessibility, and what this signals as a stance against generic mass production and the ambivalence that we have had about where things come from and what they mean. Yeah, so we'd love to discuss this a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, Kristen, I'm so thrilled to have you here with us. And I'm going to throw a question to you about this insight, because this old school energy insight about expressing depth and quality, character through curated choices, in many ways, certainly to me, epitomizes so much of who you are in the world. As someone who lives really, I would say, at the intersection of style and curation, a style curator, if you will, as a founder of a fashion line, even your recent editing of Kim Hastreiter's book Stuff, which is all about curated expression. And then, of course, in your work today as executive creative director of Real Real, all about both real and vintage and reuse and the economics of reuse. So my question to you, either in the capacity of the current role or just more broadly, is what kind of demand are you seeing for timeless aesthetics, product styles over kind of more trend-focused consumption?
Thank you, Trace. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. And I have so much to say about all of these. As they were going through, it's like my brain was like on fire. They're all really fantastic. In terms of the demand that we're seeing for timeless, I think that I think my instinct is to shift the lens from timeless to what I might call human. And I think Genevieve touched on that in this last insight, which is this. I think we are living in an intersection of a moment where the question of what is human and what is tech is like very on the top of people's brains. And I think that exists in sort of more philosophical spaces, like in the AI versus, like what does AI make or know versus what do we? But I think it also exists in the production of goods. And what is made by whom and how. And if we accept the idea that everything that gets made is in many ways holding the aggregate energy of the entirety of the process in which it came to be sitting on the shelf in which you purchase it, and that's the moment when you intersect with it, then I think that we are seeing a transformation around our expectations of what energy that stuff should hold, what's healthy for us, what we want. And so I think it's timeless insofar as it's human. And I think that to me, that's really where the shift is taking place. I think you have, the endless sort of TikTok trend machine that in many ways has rendered all trend meaningless because it moves so quickly that by the time it's a trend, it's no longer a trend, And so I think that leaves people in a very individualistic space, which is like, back to kind of like this idea of curation and of Kim's book, right? You take someone like Kim Hastreiter, who, for those of you who don't know her, is the founding editor of Paper Magazine and like a culture and zeitgeist maker in New York City for the last 50 years, has had her hands in all sorts of things. And I had the great privilege of editing her book this year, which is about it is her life and the history of downtown New York culture seen through the lens of the stuff she's amassed along the way. And part of the feeling that I had in the entirety of sort of working, and this is the best of stuff, right? This is like the Basquiat that she bought on the street from Basquiat when they were both kids that she had to borrow $200 from her mom to buy. We're not talking about like your run of the mill stuff, but it's it's part of the piece of her narrative. She didn't walk into a gallery and spend $15 million in a Basquiat. It was a piece of her story. And I think for her generation, relating to stuff and objects as the narrative shards of the life that's been lived is intuitive and natural. And I think for this generation now, it's less intuitive, less natural, because I think there's a greater distance between the stuff, the people making the stuff, the people consuming the stuff, and the life being lived that results in the accumulation or the acquiring of that stuff. And I think that delta is a tension we're living in. And I think that's why the answer to that ultimately has to be this sense of sort of like humanity, like who made it? What is the personal opinion and the unique point of view that collected it? What does it mean about me that I chose it? I think we're coming back around to all of that because of the tension between sort of the human and the technological.
I'd love to jump in on that just for a sec, because if you, you look at all of this so far, these trends, it feels like there's always been a constant push-pull between culture and commerce, right? And a lot of the stuff on this side is very aspirational. And a lot of the stuff early on around lo-fi is almost a reaction to that aspiration. And I think it's really interesting to watch the interplay. Now, brands have always typically played in the realm of aspiration because you can sell more stuff that way. But I think it's a really interesting thing, because if brands continue to ignore the culture, culture will end up ignoring the brand. And I think this is going to be a really interesting kind of territory to continually push into, especially as technology democratizes the playing field a bit, or more so, levels it a bit more. Sorry, I just want to throw that in because what you said.
Brilliant quote. We wouldn't have missed it. Thank you, Shane. Jen, over to you, on to the next.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kristen and Shane. I really love those thoughts, and what we're talking about with energy, I guess, of everything you buy has all of the energy of the material and the methods of production within that object. And there's that principle now that like everything you buy is a vote for the world that you want to live in. And that tension, or, the inherent conflict between aspiration and sustainability, and that like 75% of the companies on the NASDAQ could not, they're not sustainable. So there is like a reckoning that's happening on a wider scale. And that kind of segues into our next one, which is food-onomics. And food's obviously used to signal a lot of things: comfort, tradition, home, and increasingly like values and taste. Luxury and art is also a new one, or not new, but heightened in certain ways. And as a visual and narrative tool, it's obviously very flexible, and we love food, so it has a magnetic quality about the imagery. And culturally, one of the more interesting phenomena to emerge in this realm is the resurgence of dinner parties. So the lost art of entertaining, and like we talked about before with like golf and martinis, the practice of throwing dinner parties feels to a lot of us like a fossil of a bygone era, but it's actually being reborn in a big and really conscious way by Gen Z and people in their 20s. And while we can point to economic factors like the cost of socializing in restaurants and bars, there's really like a much deeper dimension to this, and it's taking an interest in the art of thoughtful socializing and using food in a way to build community, but also to show love and to resist distancing and an online alienation. And then, traveling for food. Who doesn't? Food destination tourism has blown up our social feeds. And, either downstream or upstream of the internet's obsession with food, authentic local cuisine and destination dining have surged as leading motivators for travel. So countries that we know for their culinary cultures are reporting record tourism numbers. So it's not just you if you feel like everybody went to Japan or Greece last year. And then the last kind of intersection here is with fashion and food. There are headlines out there, I see them all the time, that food is the new luxury, and that's being absorbed in different ways by brands. both high and low. For example, fashion houses collaborating with food brands and chefs and restaurants and vice versa. It seems to be an extension of this experiential and immersive marketing strategy that brands are taking on. And I was actually on a flight a couple of weeks ago and sitting next to this guy who runs a concierge business in New York City. And he was telling me that the thing that he has to deal with the most is trying to get, obviously, like a huge part of it is trying to get bookings at restaurants. But he was like, the most exclusive is the cafe at Tiffany's, which is not known for its food, but it's just like this immersive experience of whatever Tiffany's signifies, which is kind of a mystery to me. But yeah, there's also the whole like Erewhon influencer phenomena, $30 smoothies, food themed jewelry, the croissant lamp. Obviously, this is all part of the TikTok trend machine. But it's also related to what we talked about in Old Soul Energy in this esoteric symbolism of experiential commodities.
Thanks, Jen. Shane, I'm going to throw this one back on you. You've done so much incredible brand work in the F&B space, and this whole concept of will travel for food, actually going back to the food tourism insight. What are your thoughts just on the signals that surround this food-onomics space?
Sure. But before I jump in, I want to talk about dinner parties for a sec, because you've done a lot of dinner party shoots. But you know what happens on a commercial level? A lot of representation of dinner party, but no one's eating. It's kind of interesting, because they represent communal, gathering, friendly, warm, sunshine from a brand presentation perspective. It's kind of just an interesting thing I keep on noticing. But on the food tourism stuff, I was recently at a very fancy jewel box restaurant in Paris. It was Michelin starred, and every time a plate came out, someone would take a picture of that perfect plate. And then I was in a street market in Cape Town, and guess what? Same thing happened. Food tourism effectively is a really interesting signifier because, look, everyone eats. Food is both universal, but also really personal and intimate. But in culture, it's less about that you are what you eat, and it's more about you are what you show people you eat. And so food has weirdly become a performative signaling of your cultural sensibilities and your tastes. So whether it's in a street market in Cape Town, you take that picture, or in that restaurant in Paris, it's an easy, maybe less trite way of signaling where you are, what you're about. It can be somewhat performative, but the internet feels like it's mostly populated with puppies, babies, and perfect plating. And I think this is an interesting thing for brands to look at, because arguably that's flooding the zone with the sameness, but people are trying to express a new sensibility through food. You can eat your way through a culture and then you can document it. It's, again, a lot more interesting to see that plate in Paris than it is another picture over the Eiffel Tower. This is aspirational. It's interesting. It feels a little bit more intimate. But I think that the shift and the opportunity is represented in this very picture. Like less perfect plating, more messy eating. And I think you're starting to see people just feel comfortable with actually the act of eating, not the act of just presenting what you're about to eat. And I think there might be an opportunity for brands to kind of, actually get people in, capture a little bit more of the rawness and the realness, forgive me, the authenticity of the actual experience of tourism through actual eating, not just plating. So I'll leave it at that.
And it doesn't just have to be that perfect,
Never.
Ecstatic bite at the end of every Instagram video either, where they
No.
take.
Food should be messy. Food should reflect humanity in its own weird way. And the best food is often not the perfect food. It's the one that's most enjoyed. And you're starting to see a little bit more of that come out in cultural representation, but you're not yet seeing it at a brand level because everything is still perfectly plated and every product is perfectly presented.
I want to predict that I think we're actually going to go in a different direction where we'll start seeing more images of people taking photos of the plate after they've eaten to show that this communal experience has occurred, right? Thinking about consumption as collective and like not, moving away from this perfection. So this is what I'm imagining we'll start seeing soon.
I once proposed to a food client that you didn't show that dinner party, you just showed all the empty plates sitting in the dishwasher after the party. It obviously got shot down, but maybe one day.
The glasses, we should see the glasses all over the surfaces with the lipstick on it, and that would be really interesting.
Right. Totally.
It's quite interesting because we are seeing that from our clients. We're seeing, like, we don't want to see like the plated picture. We want to see the experience of discovery or delight of this, that the moment, that the social dimension of eating, whether it's like travel related or if it's dinner party related. It's funny as you're saying, with these shoots where you're recreating dinner parties, like how no one's eating, and we're so sensitive to that in our line of work and stock, because so often, there's this fantastic shoot, but then like there's no coffee in the coffee cup that somebody's drinking, just those little details. And we have seen like all of these really like fun shoots also come in that are a little bit hectic, that they do have like the dishes and the mess, and we suspect maybe they'd had a few drinks during and actually like had a dinner party and had fun. So we'd definitely love to be seeing more of that. Leading on from that, we are now talking about an imperfect life, and I personally have gotten through this whole presentation without saying authenticity, but here we are. I can't go on without it. We use it so much, it's kind of hard to pin down its actual meaning anymore, but I feel like it's helpful to sometimes think of it more as a verb than an adjective, and this process of getting closer to the things that we know to be true, and especially in visual media, a stripping away of artifice and an imposed way of seeing or thinking. So this insight is concerned with that, and how we're conditioned to imagine and understand what constitutes a good life, and in our lifestyle models. People are so sick of consumer media narratives continuing to push this idea of milestones that are typically economic in nature and are frankly unattainable to most people in our economic climate, like even things that we take for granted, like tertiary education, home ownership, retirement. And as a result, we're seeing like this macro social shift towards prioritizing a different set of values centered on communality and clear-sighted, enlightened mindsets. So there are a couple of different manifestations of this. Basically, unglamorized moments with stories that feel true to people and their experiences. And this translates to like the moment that's captured, but it's also the people, like being presented without stylization and in their natural state, in their natural environments, the real relationships. And just abandoning kind of this need to push things towards aspirational imagery and feelings of what life should look and feel like. And I actually read something yesterday that I thought was quite funny and related to this, and that's the Dull Men's Club, where members enjoy just doing routine tasks like vacuum cleaning and making lentil soup. And I thought that was kind of like a funny extreme example of this. And then scrappy and happy. The definition of scrappy is being tight on resources. So scrappy and happy is like celebrating a kind of redirection of where we look for joy. And it doesn't have to be in time or cost intensive activities or, more idealized or romantic settings. And instead kind of celebrating life's simple pleasures and creating space for spontaneity. In other words, like doing things on the cheap and on the fly. And then lastly, entering the friendiverse. So economic factors and the loneliness epidemic have revealed pretty obvious flaws in the individualistic and isolationist social structures that most of us have kind of formed a life along. And there's this huge shift towards looking at alternative organization like communal living, chosen families, extended and non-traditional family structures. But most significantly, a celebration or like an interest in the importance of friendships, which has been really deprioritized in our culture. Basically, I'm pretty sure because they're not like financial or legal institutions like family or marriage. So I think there's a lot more, and there's going to be a lot more attention and focus paid to like the wider relationships we have in our life. But like as a personal anecdote, I 2 months ago moved to a community of less than 400 people. So, and this is real, just the shared resource mentality, and from everything from like tool shares and resource swaps to if you're going to the grocery store, you also like pick up medication or food for other people, and it feels so radical to me, but it's actually just like pretty standard for like rural communities.
Love that. Kristen, if I can actually hearkening back to what you spoke about when you spoke about when you spoke about old school energy, and you really spoke about human as the core insight. And as we talk about this idea of the good life and the friendiverse, in part because I'm lucky to know you through friends, and I know how deeply you value and celebrate friendships and community in your life. I guess back in the sort of brand world, do you find audience today more responsive to narratives that are focused on friendship and community versus kind of the hero and where we've been for so long?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, I do actually I see people responding to community and friendship in the ways you're talking about in terms of image making and showing friendship, showing community. I think Kim's book actually is there's a whole section of it, a beat throughout, that's called My Amazing Friends, and she has them numbered. She talks about each friend and the way that friend intersected with a piece of her life, what they shared, what that person made, how they changed each other as a result, as part of her collection of stuff. So literally as part of her collection of stuff, she's got people in the mix of this stuff. And I think that is that's something that we see also at the Real, just like, people want to shop other people's edits. And I think that we're in a culture digitally where we have a lot of simulation of connection without the actual facilitation of that connection in intimate physical ways. You might have I watch my daughter on her Snapchat and she's got like intimate communication with many, many kids who she doesn't necessarily have intimate experience with. And I think we're living in response to that. One of the things that I find really interesting from both an image making perspective and also a consumer behavior perspective is the way that people are preferencing connection in their choice of consumer behavior without even really recognizing they're doing it. So like Facebook Marketplace is like one of my favorite places in the world to buy and sell things. And one of the main outcroppings of that I see that is never really talked about, but is the unlikely, tender, interesting human connections you make every time you sell or buy something on Facebook Marketplace. These are people from wildly different backgrounds, potentially, or not, or who knows, but they're and you're meeting at an intersection moment where somebody needs to dispense with something and somebody needs to acquire something. And usually that connects to some intersectional moment in a person's life. I'm moving, I'm having a kid and need this thing. My kid is too old to ride that bike and I'm handing it off, like whatever. And I think that the choice to have a high touch one-to-one human experience through our consumption of products goes back to something Genevieve said earlier, which I just want to highlight, which is that one of the realities of our universe and of our world, for better and worse, and I think in many ways it's worse, but it's not for me to judge, it's just at this second, it's for me to say, which is that we live in a universe where I think people have stopped believing that the common good, community, religion, organizing factors in culture are their main ways of participating in culture, their main ways of voting. Their biggest sense of how they vote now, many people, is what they buy. What they buy is who they are. The power they wield is expressed through the things they choose to consume. And I think seeing migrations to places like Facebook Marketplace, to what happens on the Real, where there is this sense of one-to-one connection. This one person picked out this one thing, and I can assume that they and me were sort of kindred in some way or another because I also like that one thing. I think to me, there's a real bright spot in that, in the reorientation towards one-to-one connection and intimacy through the life experience that our stuff and our images represent.
So much, Kristen. Shane, did you have a quick build on that you wanted to? And then actually, I do have a question for Tara as well.
Sure. I mean, this touches in my deep and dying professional and personal passion community. I think, communities have organized themselves since civilization, right? And now, we think of community through the lens of some social media platform, which is fine. But, people naturally organize around the things that they just give a shit about. More often than not, it's not brand. Somehow brands put themselves at the center of a consumer's universe when they're absolutely relatively irrelevant, unless they're a proxy for what people actually care about. So it's less about whether I love Nike and more about whether I'm into athletic performance or health or looking interesting on a street. So I think there's an interesting opportunity here because communities themselves are sources of truth. And, if you really want to know maybe what is happening in the world, just look at what people talk about and what they care about and what they deeply engage in. And then for a brand, the opportunity might live in thinking about how you might be of service to that community. Not how can I sell you more stuff, but how can I help you and be of service to your needs and wants. And I think that's been a huge turn and a huge unlock for us and many of our clients in really rethinking their relationship. So it's not about audience, it's about community. It's not about people who might buy or consume your media or your product, and more about how people connect and collect together so that a brand might have a meaningfully helpful role in participating in those cares and needs. Sorry, this is the thing I care about.
Thank you.
The world.
It's actually a perfect segue to my question to Tara, because nobody better served to talk about real storytelling as we're talking about honest representation as part of this broader insight. And so, Tara, the question for you is that there's been this, obviously, there's always been a very strong imperative for brands to engage in storytelling, and it's become more and more of an imperative, right? Which has led to these documentary approaches and principles, which have bled over into advertising. So do you think this is an angle that's going to continue to be popular? And just your thoughts on how we might see this shift, evolve, change?
Yeah, absolutely. Stories are what connect people, right? And help us understand ourselves and other community spaces, cultures that we maybe don't have as much access to. So seeing that documentary aesthetic, it's deploying this sense of having a window into people's lives. And documentary is also about the haphazard, the candid and spontaneous, which is inherently, kind of a pushback against the perfectionism of that influencer aesthetic. And it's very aligned with the visual trends we're seeing here. I also want to come back to Kristen's point about what is human and what is tech. AI can make beautiful images, but it can't make good stories. It generates, it doesn't create or iterate from creativity successfully. So telling these documentary style and lo-fi stories is what I think clearly differentiates the human creativity from the high text. I think that's also a little bit of what is happening here. And there's also this real fear of the future with climate change and war. So I think creatives are really starting to sit more with comfort and joy. Like, what can we see and recognize and experience about humanity, and what makes us feel good in the moment? How do we kind of visualize that feeling? That's what I'm seeing, is that creatives are telling stories about who we are now and what we have to save by showing humanity in this warm, kind of luminous light, by latching on to the, all the different things that we've seen, food, comfort, the like skills and craft of the things around us. We're trying to really lean in to our collective humanity and how we experience that in a meaningful way, and why we need to harness that and maintain it, right? It's a pushback against this fear of what we're losing.
I think that there's something I'd love to build on that, because what Tara said really resonates with me. And one of the things I see as a trend, and I saw it in that first trend you were talking about, and Tara just mentioned it, like the luminous light, the yellow glow, all of this stuff. The other thing that we're seeing a huge rise in these days is spirituality, Buddhism, like these things that are nonverbal, that are energetic, things that story can't explain. And I think when you think about how much story we're all producing, how much each individual person ends up behaving almost like a brand in their sense of what they're putting forth in the world, and then what brands and the people that are creating brand and image do to sort of tango with that. I think that there is an orientation now away from story and language and towards energy. And I think that's why you see the rise in this like glowing light and these candid moments, because those are things that communicate something nonverbal. And I think the interest in nonverbal communication visually feels fascinating to me in terms of how it might affect this kind of work, or the kind of work that you all are doing. You know, how do you communicate a vibe and an energy as much as you're communicating a narrative?
Love that. Ali, do you have a question for us from the audience?
Absolutely. We've got a question that has come in where Brian asks, are we stock photographers reaching back to previous times that images like these were important? Indeed, I myself did a dinner party, Dirty Dishes shoot in 1996. Will we do what the fashion world does and honor prior trends?
Jen, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think it really, I mean, I'm going to build on what Shane was reflecting on, in that, I mean, everything is cyclical. Like we have this push and pull where there's always like a reaction to something, or or more, and also sometimes just a course correction. Like you go too far in one direction and then you're pulled back in another. So, you know, this oscillation between these different polarities of like the high production, the like this aesthetic, the polished aesthetic, or if it's a bit more scrappy, if it's a bit more messy. I think is important to also note when we're talking about, when we're presenting a report, that we're not talking about these 5 insights at the exclusion of the reality of other things that are equally true out there. Because, for example, with down-key shift, there's still, the opposite is also true. There's also a lot of like high-key, vibrant, immediate, kind of aggressive visuals out there that are doing their job. So there's always kind of space for a lot of things to be true at once. But I think when we're looking at the arc of trends, there's definitely a lot of value in looking at where those have appeared or surfaced before, and understanding what those relationships are. Like, Shane was talking about like punk aesthetics and like what that was a reaction to, and that we saw that in the early 90s. So what is shared, but also what's different about this time around? Like what is, because we're living in a different world, different times. Even if there's like aesthetic similarities, it's coming from a different place as well.
Thank you, Jane. Ali, over to you to wrap us up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. A big thank you to all our speakers. Really insightful session, to say the least, actually. Lots of great conversations. So as a part of registering and attending this webinar, we'll be sending you an email with a link to the Visual Insights report, so you all get first dibs at it. Also, as promised at the beginning of the webinar, you can see a QR code on your screen. You can scan that or click the link in the chat and download the report now. So again, I'd like to thank you all. We're almost at time now for your participation, and also to all the attendees for joining the event. We hope to see you all at our next event. Thank you so much.